YouTube, it's Multiplier here with a video that definitely won't help you make better tracks, but it's pretty interesting. I think it's interesting. I discovered something, check me out, genius right here. Anyway, it is all about the Ableton Live 9.5 waveforms, because you may have noticed that the waveforms in Ableton Live 9.5 and newer look a lot nicer. They're a lot more curvy. Before, they were very, very, very blocky. They were just like block, 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 block. And that was representing the digital samples that you're creating. So I suppose it's the most accurate way to look at your sound as a digital signal, or it's one way to look at your sound as a digital signal. Whereas when you look at the waveform in Live 9.5 and newer, it's a lot more curvy, and when you zoom in, you can't see the individual samples in a digital way. No matter how far you zoom, it's real curvy and stuff. Now, if you don't know the difference between digital and analog signals, I'm not going to tell you myself now because there's no point. Wikipedia does it much better than me. Have a Google, have a Wikipedia, digital versus analog signals, and that will give you an idea as to what I mean by a digital signal in a blocky way versus an analog curvy signal. Digital, analog, digital, analog. Makes sense? So basically what I was doing one day is looking at the waveforms, and I did something like that. I moved my mouse up. I was looking at the waveforms, and as I zoomed in, I'm a nerd, I look at waveforms. As I zoomed in, I noticed, what's going on there? What are all these extra peaks? Wowzers, trousers, what's that, a spooky ghost? That's what went through my brain as I saw this. Crikey, that's bloody bonkers. Ooh, look at that. See how all these extra peaks are appearing as I'm zooming in? And that got me curious, because I'm a curious person. I thought, what is going on there? And then what I did is I had a bit of a think. I used my thinking brain. I ran some experiments, and what I guessed turned out to be true, because I'm a genius like that, it turned out. What is happening is, what Ableton is doing, I had this confirmed by Ableton because it's not in help documentation and no one's talking about this. I'll give you some more information in a sec. Basically, what Ableton is doing with the Ableton Live 9.5 waveforms is approximating what happens after you convert it to the analog domain through a sound card. Because when you have a digital waveform, because we're creating digital files, at some stage the listener is going to hear it in an analog form because speakers play analog sounds, and it's your sound card that converts it from digital to analog. That's why they're called DACs or DACs, digital to analog converters. DAC, DAC, exclamation point. So what Ableton have actually done is pretty clever, even though they don't really talk about it. And yeah, I just think it's really, really cool, the fact they've approximated what happens when you convert it to this analog domain. Makes sense? Let me give you an example. So right here, you can see as I zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on this heavily limited, heavily distorted snare drum, these extra peaks appear. And yeah, that's pretty much what happens. Now, if I ran this through a, let's bump it up back to 0. If I ran this through Ozone, which can actually do something called true peak limiting, which is, I'll explain that in a sec as I'm loading it up. So it's not just Isotope Ozone that does this. Loads of the good limiters do. You do need a good limiter for this though. It's not a super standard thing. Might be some other names in other plugins. So I will grab just the maximizer. So got the maximizer in Isotope Ozone here. I have, yep, I got it on the right channel, 1 here. I'll just kick it into IRC3, no threshold, ceiling 0 is fine, and here it is, true peak limiting. What that does is it does limiting, like you all know what limiters do, hopefully, if not have a Google. It does limiting, but factoring in this conversion to the analog domain, so you don't get any of these extra peaks appearing higher up in the waveform when it's converted to analog through your sound card. Makes sense? Let me show you. That's the best thing to do. In fact, I will duplicate that channel so you have something to compare it to. Delete that guy, and cool. So let's make sure I don't get in the muddle. 2, Isotope Ozone 7, true peak limiting, turn it on. Limiting's not doing any limiting apart from the true peak limiting. And now I'll bounce that to audio, freeze, flatten, and check out what it's done. So what it's done is some extra limiting to avoid these extra peaks going above 0. So it's a way of preventing what's sometimes called intersample peaks or intersample clipping in the analog domain. So yeah, you can see it's had to do quite a bit of limiting at the front part of the sound. In fact, what I'll do is turn them both down 4 dB again, so you can clearly see on the waveforms, -4. So you can see now in the bottom example, I'm going to color code it red. Red's pretty cool now, red's stupid. Yellow is way better than red. So in the bottom example, we've done true peak limiting in the analog domain. So notice now in the bottom one, as I zoom in, as the extra peaks appear, they don't go above that level that we set it to, which was 0. So it's not clipping in the analog domain would be one way of looking at it. And this is basically what's happening. It's called sync interpolation, or the Whittaker-Shannon interpolation formula. It's a way of taking a bunch of individual signals, so imagine just a bunch of like dots on a graph, and taking these dots on a graph and turning it into a continuous line. So it's taking a digital signal and making it, I suppose, continuous, analog, curvy, whatever you want to call it. And it turns out that this sync interpolation is pretty similar. It's a good approximation for what happens in the sound card. I said card there. It's pretty similar to what happens in the sound card when the sound card takes a digital signal and converts it to analog using the reconstruction filter. I don't know what that is. Anyway, you don't need to know the maths. All that you might find interesting is the waveforms are an approximation for what happens at the sound card stage in terms of taking a digital signal and converting it to analog, so your speakers or headphones can actually throw sound into your brain. That is what is going on. Now, I don't know what you're going to do with that information apart from go, cool story, bro, interesting, lol, hashtag, yeah, something like that. But I don't know, you may find it interesting. I haven't even decided when the right time to use true peak limiting is. I mean, I use it on my masters because Ozone say you should, but I haven't done some proper science investigations as to when the best times are to use true peak limiting, because I'm the sort of guy, I don't just take information, I need to find out the facts. So yeah, I'm going to do some research as to when the best times or time is to use true peak limiting. But yeah, interesting, right? So yeah, those curvy waveforms aren't just curvy for the sake of curvy, they're actually giving you useless information, or maybe useful, I haven't decided yet, but interesting, right?